Did Marco Polo lie about everything? Imagine a prison cell. It is 1298, somewhere in the maritime Republic of Genoa, a city that smells of salt, blood, and the fierce pride of a rival to Venice. The stone walls are slick with damp. The air is thick with the groan of oars from the harbor and the clank of iron. In this cell, two men huddle together. One is a writer of romances, a man known for his lush, fantastical tales of knights and chivalry, Rustic Hello of Pisa. The other is a grizzled merchant in his 40s, a Venetian captured during a sea battle, a man with a face that has seen the sun-scorched deserts and the wind freeze the steppes. His name is Marco Polo. The merchant has nothing but time and memory. The writer has nothing but parchment and ink. Together, they begin a book. Not a dry ledger of goods and prices, but a staggering, sprawling, unbelievable story. A story of a young man who left Venice at 17, walked into the East for 3 years, and spent 24 years at the court of the greatest emperor the world had ever seen, Kublai Khan. A story of black stones that burn like wood, of paper money that holds the value of pure gold, of a vast and civilized kingdom called Cathay. And from the moment the ink dried on that manuscript, le devisement du monde, the description of the world, people began to ask a simple, corrosive question: did he lie? Not just a little. Not just the usual merchant's puffery or a traveler's tendency to stretch a tale like a sailor tightening a rope. But the big lie. The lie about everything. Did Marco Polo ever actually set foot in China? Or was he a con man, a fabulist, a pirate of other men's stories, who sat in that Genoese prison and pieced together a fake journey from Persian guidebooks, half-remembered hearsay, and the wild dreams of medieval Europe? To answer this, we cannot simply shout liar or saint. We must walk a razor's edge. We must become detectives, historians, and psychologists. We must sift through the silences in his book, the absurdities, the glaring omissions. We must ask a harder question: what does it mean to tell the truth about a journey into the utterly unknown? The case for the prosecution, the Book of Silences. Let us begin with the prosecution's case. It is a formidable one, built not on what Marco Polo said, but on what he did not say. The list is a canyon, a yawning void where the Great Wall of China should be. The Great Wall. Here is the first and most famous charge. Marco Polo traveled from the Mediterranean to Peking Kanbalik, as he called it. He crossed the Gobi Desert. He traversed the entire width of northern China. Yet he never once mentions the single most obvious, most colossal, most awe-inspiring man-made structure on the planet. The Great Wall. He does not describe its snaking ramparts, its watchtowers, its legions of imperial guards. It is as if a traveler today described a trip across the United States and forgot to mention the Grand Canyon. For the prosecution, the case is closed. How could anyone, even a notoriously unobservant merchant, ride for months along the northern border of China and miss a wall that stretched for thousands of miles? Tea. The second great silence is the national drink of China. Tea. In Marco Polo's China, there is no tea. No mention of the steaming green leaves, the elaborate ceremonies, the cups passed in the courtyards of the Khan's palace. For a man who claims to have become a trusted emissary of the emperor, who describes the food, the feasts, the customs of the court in lavish detail, to ignore tea is bizarre. It suggests that the author had never held a warm cup of it, never seen the ritual. It is a cultural blind spot so profound that it screams second-hand knowledge. Foot binding. Then there is the matter of women's feet. The practice of tightly binding the feet of upper-class Chinese girls to create the famous lotus feet was common during the Song and Yuan dynasties, the very era Marco Polo claims to have been present. It was a visually striking, culturally defining practice. He never mentions it. He describes the beauty of Chinese women in general terms, but never the tiny, arched, crippled feet that were the ultimate symbol of feminine allure. How could an observant, curious traveler from a culture that adored the female form not notice this? Chinese writing. He says he learned 4 languages. He never mentions learning Chinese characters. He never describes the beautiful, calligraphic, utterly alien script of the civilization he claims to have mastered. He uses Persian and Turkish words for almost everything. For the prosecution, this is the smoking gun. Marco Polo's China is not China at all. It is the Persian-Turkic world of the Silk Road. He traveled to Persia, to the stands, but he never pushed on to the yellow earth of the Middle Kingdom. The missing geography. His geography is riddled with holes. He describes Japan Chipangu but gets its location wildly wrong. He confuses the Indian Ocean with a lake. He places the island of Madagascar in the wrong spot. For a man who claimed to have sailed the seas of the East, his navigation is alarmingly sloppy. It looks, the prosecution argues, like the work of a man piecing together a map from travelers' barstool tales, not from his own footsteps. The defense rests on a single, impossible object, the year 1281. And yet, the defense has a weapon. It is a small, strange, utterly convincing detail. It is the year 1281. And the object is a catapult. Marco Polo tells a story about Kublai Khan's attempt to invade Japan. A great fleet is built. The first invasion fails. The Khan, furious, orders a second, larger fleet. According to Polo, the Khan brought in 2 Christian mastercraftsmen of stone-throwing mangonels from the Middle East to design better siege engines. This story, for centuries, was dismissed as another Polo fantasy. No Japanese chronicles mention such Christian engineers. Then, in the 20th century, Japanese underwater archaeologists began exploring the remains of the Mongol invasion fleet at the bottom of Hakata Bay. They found anchors, arrows, and stone projectiles. And then, something extraordinary. They found ceramic bombs. Hollow, thick-shelled pottery spheres designed to be filled with gunpowder and shrapnel. This was the world's first naval shelling. And in the Yuan Shi, the official Chinese history of the Yuan dynasty compiled long after Polo's death, but from contemporary records, there is a single, dry, bureaucratic entry. It states that in the year 1281, Kublai Khan summoned 2 Arab engineers, Ismail and Shams al-Din, to build new types of catapults for the Japanese campaign. The odds of Marco Polo guessing the year, the ethnicity of the engineers Arab Christian from the Middle East, their specialty stone-throwing mangonels and their purpose the second invasion of Japan are astronomically small. He got it right. He got a tiny, obscure bureaucratic detail right. A detail that no guidebook or hearsay would contain. A detail that smells of dust, of a clerk's scroll, of being there. This is the defense's pattern. It is not grand. It is petty. It is 1,000 tiny correct details that no liar would bother to invent. The black stones. He describes a black stone dug from mountains in Cathay that burns like a log. He says it is so abundant that the whole province heats its baths with it. This is coal. In the year 1298, coal was virtually unknown in Europe. A few outcroppings in England and Scotland were used by peasants, but for a Venetian merchant to describe it as a common, everyday fuel source in a far-off land? That is not a lie. That is a revelation. A liar would have invented a magical salamander or a tree that never stops burning. Polo gave us coal. Dull, useful, real. Paper money. He describes with precise, almost bureaucratic awe, how Kublai Khan turned mulberry bark into currency. How the Khan had the bark stripped, pounded into sheets, stamped with the imperial seal, and decreed that all merchants must accept it under pain of death. He describes how this paper money was used for everything from buying a loaf of bread to paying soldiers. In the 1290s, Europe was still using gold, silver, and barter. Paper money was inconceivable. A con man inventing a fantasy would have described a city paved with gold. Polo described a fiscal policy. And he was right. Kublai Khan did exactly that. The postal system. He describes the yam, which he calls the yam, the Mongol Pony Express. A network of relay stations every 25 or 30 miles, with fresh horses, food, and shelter. He notes that the riders wear a tablet of authority apiza and can cover 200 miles in a day. He describes how the Khan's messengers could ride from Kanbalik to the shore of the Sea of Azov in 10 days. Again, this is not fantasy. This is the dry, accurate description of a logistical marvel. A traveler who saw it would note it. A liar would never think of it. The salt of Tibet. He describes, with vivid, ugly detail, the custom of using hardened salt cakes as currency in Tibet, and how the emperor's soldiers would use these salt cakes to pay for supplies, only to find they had been adulterated with flour. This is such a strange, specific, and unpleasant detail. It has the ring of a man who once bit into a salty, floury mess and cursed his bad luck. The problem of the eye. But the strongest argument for Polo's veracity is the least flattering to him. It is the voice. Read the book. It is not a heroic epic. Marco Polo is not the hero of his own story. He is a functionary. He is a manager. He is a middleman. The book is, at its core, a long, obsessive, almost autistic catalogue of commerce. How many pepper plants grow on a vine? How many ships are in the port of Zaiton? How much tax the Khan collects from Hangzhou? The weight of the gold on the Khan's throne. The number of white horses in his herd. The precise circumference of a giant tree. This is not the voice of a liar. Liars are seductive. They tell you what you want to hear: monsters, Amazons, cities of gold, the fountain of youth. Polo gives you the yield of the silk harvest. It is the voice of a bean counter. A logistics nerd. A merchant who spent his life looking at the world and thinking, how many? How much? What does it cost? He is the man who, after 24 years of travel, is most impressed by the fact that the Khan has a reliable postal system. If he lied, he is the most boring, obsessive, and tedious liar who ever lived. And that, paradoxically, is his greatest mark of authenticity. The great omissions reconsidered. But what of the prosecution's mighty silences? The Great Wall? The tea? The foot binding? The Chinese script? The defense has answers. They are not perfect, but they are plausible. And they rely on one crucial fact. The book we read is not Marco Polo's book. It is Rusticello's book. It is a collaboration between a Venetian merchant with poor literary skills and a Pisan romance writer with a love for the marvelous. We have no original manuscript. We have over 150 different versions, all copied by hand, all corrected by scribes who had never left Italy. The Polo family was famously secretive. After Marco's death, they refused to let anyone see the original manuscript. The text we have is a fractured, unreliable witness from the start. The Great Wall reconsidered. Here is the defense's killer blow. The Great Wall we know today, the massive stone fortification that winds through the mountains, is largely a Ming dynasty construction 1368 to 1644. It was built after Marco Polo's death. In the 13th century, the wall was a series of crumbling, discontinuous rammed earth fortifications, often overgrown and abandoned. The Mongols had breached them easily. To Kublai Khan, the old walls were irrelevant relics of a defeated dynasty. A traveler coming from the north, from Mongolia, into China, might not even notice them. Or, if he did, they would be as unremarkable to him as a ruined Roman road is to a modern driver. He didn't mention them for the same reason you don't mention that the grass is green. They were old, broken, and meaningless. T reconsidered. T is harder. But consider the audience. Marco Polo was writing for Europeans. In the 13th century, Tea was unknown in Europe. If he had described it, he would have had to explain it from scratch, a hot drink made from dried leaves that tastes bitter and is not wine. It would have taken a paragraph of bizarre explanation. He was already struggling to get his audience to believe in paper money and coal. Perhaps he simply didn't think it was important. Or perhaps, as a merchant, he was focused on things he could sell: silk, spices, gems. Tea was not a major trade item for the Venetians. Or, the most likely explanation, he didn't like it. He was a Venetian. He drank wine. To him, tea was just hot, weedy water. Not worth a mention. Foot binding reconsidered. Foot binding was a practice of the Han Chinese elite. Kublai Khan was a Mongol. The Mongols did not bind their women's feet. They thought it was barbaric. Polo lived and worked in the Khan's court, a Mongol court. He moved among the conquerors, not the conquered. He probably saw very few bound feet. The bound foot was a sign of submission, of the old song order. It would have been hidden from the sight of the foreign administrator. He didn't mention it because, in his social world, it didn't exist. Chinese script reconsidered. And the script? He says he knew 4 languages. He means the 4 lingua francas of the Mongol Empire: Persian, Turkish, Mongolian, and perhaps a local Turkic dialect. These were the languages of trade and administration. Chinese was the language of the conquered. A clever Venetian would learn the Khan's language Mongolian and the merchant's language Persian. He would never bother to learn the thousands of characters of written Chinese. He was a practical man. He learned what worked. The Persian shadow. Now we arrive at the deepest, most unsettling truth about Marco Polo. He was not an explorer in the modern sense. He was not a cartographer drawing a blank map. He was a traveler on a well-worn road. The Silk Road was ancient. Merchants, monks, and spies had been using it for centuries. Polo brought nothing new in terms of route. He walked where others had walked. And he was a voracious, perhaps shameless, borrower of other men's descriptions. Large chunks of his book, particularly the sections on the Middle East, India, and Africa, are almost verbatim copies of Persian geographical handbooks, especially a book called The Wonders of the World Ajrib al-Dunya. He describes the unicorn, which is actually the Jovan rhinoceros, with the same mistakes as the Persian text. He describes the roc, the giant bird that can lift an elephant, a creature from the tales of Sinbad. Is this lying? Or is it doing research in a pre-modern way? He was not a scientist. He was a compiler. He had seen Persia. He had heard stories in the bazaars of Hormuz. He had read or had read to him Persian books. He then blended his own observations with these borrowed texts. To a medieval mind, this was not lying. This was authority. You built your truth on the truth of those who came before. The problem is that we, modern readers, want a clean division between I saw and I heard. Polo's book is a muddy swamp of the two. He rarely distinguishes. He will describe a city he clearly visited in detail, and then, in the next paragraph, tell you about a one-legged man-eater on an island he has never seen. To us, it's a lie. To him, it was just a good story that belonged in a book of the world. The psychological verdict: why would he lie? Let us leave the evidence and step into the mind of Marco Polo, on his deathbed. It is 1324. Venice. He is old, wealthy, a bit of a celebrity, and known as Illinois Million, either a reference to his millions of stories, or a corruption of his family's nickname Million. His priest and his friends gather around. They beg him, for the sake of his soul, to confess, to renounce the lies in his book. And the old man, frail and dying, whispers his final, famous reply: I have not told half of what I saw. This is not the confession of a liar. It is the cry of a man trapped by language. How do you describe the Forbidden City to a man who lives in a 2-story stone house? How do you explain a million-person city to a Venetian who thinks his own city of 100,000 is the biggest in the world? How do you convey the silence of the Gobi Desert, the weight of the Khan's gaze, the smell of 1,000 camels in the snow? He lied. Of course he lied. He lied the way a photographer lies when he chooses a single angle. He lied the way a memory lies, smoothing rough edges and brightening colors. He exaggerated the Khan's power. He placed himself closer to the throne than he likely was. He probably wasn't a governor or a special envoy. He was probably a clever merchant who got a good job in the salt and pepper trade. He padded his resume. But did he lie about everything? No. That is the lazy cynic's answer. To say he lied about everything is to say that Kublai Khan did not exist, that the Yuan dynasty was a fever dream, that paper money and coal are fictions. The man was not a god. He was not a perfect witness. He was a 14th century merchant with a love of gold and a poor memory for tea. The truth is more interesting than either the saint or the sinner. The truth is that Marco Polo is the world's first modern reporter. And like the best and worst reporters, he got some things brilliantly right, some things wildly wrong, and he shamelessly cribbed from the Associated Press of his day, the Persians. He saw the greatest civilization on earth and, in his clumsy, obsessive way, tried to tell Europe about it. And Europe didn't listen. For 200 years, his book was read as a romance. A fantasy. People believed in the rock and the unicorn. They ignored the coal and the postal system. When Christopher Columbus set sail, he carried a copy of Marco Polo's book, heavily annotated. He wasn't looking for a new world. He was looking for Cipangu, Japan and the court of the great Khan. He found America instead, and he died believing that Cuba was Cathay. He was wrong. But Marco Polo was right. The final verdict? Did Marco Polo lie? Yes. He was a man. He embellished. He borrowed. He omitted. But the prosecution's case collapses under the weight of its own perfection. It demands a flawless witness. History has no flawless witnesses. The truth is a man in a Genos prison, spinning a story from 1,000 rotting memories. The truth is the smell of a Gobi dust storm, the weight of a Mongol coin, the terrifying roar of a Khan's command. You cannot write that truth down. You can only point towards it. And for all his flaws, Marco Polo pointed truer than any European before him. He did not lie about everything. He lied about just enough to make us question the truth. And in that questioning, we find ourselves walking the Silk Road with him, squinting into the sun, wondering if what we see is real, or just another story told by a tired, brilliant, impossible man. In the end, the question is not whether Marco Polo lied. The question is whether we are brave enough to believe a man who saw too much. The Heretic's Map, the Doge Stout, and the Smell of the Bazaar. By the same unquiet historian. We have established the case. We have weighed the silences and the screams of evidence. We have sat with Marco Polo in his prison cell and watched him weave a tapestry of truth and threadbare fantasy. But a trial is not complete until we examine the witnesses, the context, and the most dangerous question of all. If he didn't go to China, where did he go? And why would a man of his standing construct a lie so elaborate it would outlive empires? Let us now walk deeper into the labyrinth. Let us turn the book over and examine its binding, its stains, its missing pages. Let us leave the courtroom and enter the smoky, salt-crusted world of the medieval Mediterranean, where a merchant's word was his only currency, and a lie could cost you your fingers. The heretics mapped the world before Polo. To understand whether Marco Polo lied, we must first understand what a lie even meant in 1300. We suffer from a Cartesian hangover. We believe in fact and fiction, in literal truth and falsehood, separated by a clean line. A medieval merchant did not. He lived in a world of signs, symbols, and the marvelous. Before Polo, The most widely read travel book in Europe was the Travels of Sir John Mandeville. It was a complete forgery. Mandeville never existed. The book was compiled by a French doctor who had likely never left his study. Yet it described dog-headed men, one-legged parasol-footed creatures, and the kingdom of Prester John. And it was considered true, not in the forensic sense, but in the moral sense. It told you what the world could be, what God might have. Hidden in the East. Polo was writing in the shadow of Mandeville. His audience expected marvels. Rustic Hello, his co-author, was a writer of Arthurian romances. The pressure to deliver the fantastic was immense. And Polo did deliver. The unicorn, the rock, the desert spirits that whisper your name. But here is the heresy, he delivered them badly. His unicorn is a rhinoceros, ugly and ill-tempered. His rock is a bird he heard about from Persian sailors. His desert spirits are a natural phenomenon, sand dunes shifting in the wind. He always tries to pull the fantastic back to the observable. He is a man who cannot stop himself from adding a footnote, but I did not see it myself. This is not the behavior of a liar. This is the behavior of a man trapped between two worlds, the medieval world of wonder and the emerging mercantile world of inventory. He wants to tell you about the giant bird. But his merchant soul forces him to add, the sailors say it can lift an elephant. I saw its feather. It was 90 spans long. He is trying to be honest about his dishonesty. The Doge stout why Venice never fully believed him. Let us travel to Venice, not the romantic city of canals we know, but the gritty, ruthless republic of the 1320s. Marco Polo returned home in 1295, after 24 years. He and his uncle and father had been given up for dead. According to family legend, they arrived at the Polo Palace in worn Tartar clothes, speaking a strange mixture of languages. They were mocked. Then they ripped open the hems of their ragged coats, and rubies, sapphires, and diamonds poured onto the table. This story is probably a lie. But it is a useful lie. It tells us how the Polos wanted to be seen, as men who had converted rags into riches, who had penetrated the secret heart of the world. Yet the Venetian establishment did not embrace Marco as a hero. He was called Illinois Million, which some scholars believe comes from million, a nickname for a man who told a million lies. Others say it comes from Emilione, a property the family owned. But the fact that the nickname stuck, that it carried a double meaning, tells us something. Venice was skeptical. Why? Because Venice was a city of merchants. They knew the Silk Road. They had trading posts in the Crimea, in Constantinople, in Tabriz. They knew that a round trip to the edge of the Gobi Desert took 3 years, not 24. They knew that no European had ever returned from Cathay with a cargo of contracts. Marco brought back no trade agreements. He brought back no exclusive rights. He brought back stories. And stories, to a Venetian merchant, are not assets. They are liabilities. Consider the Doge's court. A merchant claiming to have served the great Khan for 2 decades would have been asked, show us the letters of credit. Show us the paisa, the golden tablet that gave you safe passage. Show us the Khan's seal. Marco Polo produced none of these. In his will, written in 1324, he leaves a Turkish slave, some salt pans, a few bed sheets, and a modest sum to the church. He does not leave a golden tablet. He does not leave a chest of Chinese porcelain. He does not leave a single object that can be definitively traced to the court of Kublai Khan. For a man who claimed to have been the Khan's personal envoy, his material legacy is embarrassingly bare. The prosecution seizes on this. Aha! They cry. The merchant had no merchandise. The traveler brought home no souvenirs. He was a fraud. But the defense whispers a different explanation. The paisa, the golden tablet of authority, was not a gift. It was a loan. It belonged to the Khan. When Marco left, he would have been required to return it. As for porcelain, silk, and jewels, he was a merchant. He would have sold them. That was the point. He converted his Eastern goods into Venetian ducats, the only souvenir that matters to a merchant. The absence of exotic objects in his will proves nothing except that he was good at his job. He turned stuff into money. A journey to the edge of China? Let us now consider the most radical and most fascinating of the revisionist theories. It comes from a British librarian and historian named Francis Wood, who in 1995 published a book with the explosive title, Did Marco Polo Go to China? Wood's argument is not that Polo was a complete fabulist. It is that he traveled extensively in the Persian world, the Levant, and possibly India, but that his China is a patchwork of Persian guidebooks and second-hand accounts from Turkish and Mongol merchants he met in the bazaars of Tabriz and Hormuz. Consider the evidence for this Persian tilt. The names. Marco Polo almost never uses Chinese names for Chinese places. He uses Persian or Turkish names. Kanbalik Persian for the Khan city instead of Dadu, the Chinese name. Zaitan Persian for Olive Harbor instead of Quanju. He describes the Chinese language as a harsh tongue, but he never quotes a single Chinese word. His entire vocabulary of the East is Persian. The itinerary. His route from Hormuz to Cathay, as described in the book, is geographically nonsensical in places. He says he sailed from Hormuz to the Indian Ocean, then turned north into the desert, then crossed the Pamir Mountains, then descended into the Gobi. A real traveler would have gone from Hormuz to the Indus, then over the Karakoram. Polo's route reads like a man stitching together 3 different journeys from 3 different sources. The omissions revisited. Francis Wood adds a new omission to the list. The Great Wall is the most famous, but she also points to Chinese astronomy, the printing press, and the complex system of Chinese bureaucracy. Polo describes the Khan's court as a Mongol court, with Mongols, Persians, and Turks. He never describes the Confucian scholars, the examination system, the vast machinery of Chinese civil administration that ran beneath the Mongol conquerors. It is as if he visited the White House and described only the caterers. The cinnamon problem. He describes cinnamon growing in China. Cinnamon is not native to China. It grows in Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. A merchant who had actually traded in Chinese markets would know that Chinese cinnamon cassia is different. Polo confuses them. He is working from a Persian text that lumped all sweet bark together. The case for the Black Sea Venetian. If Polo never crossed the Gobi, what was he doing for 24 years? The answer, according to the most extreme skeptics, is simpler and sadder. He was a moderately successful merchant in the Black Sea and Persian trading posts. He visited Constantinople, Trebizond, Tabriz, and maybe Hormuz. He listened to stories from real travelers who had been to China, Nestorian Christians, Uyghur scribes, Persian diplomats. He collected their tales. Then, in a Genos prison, with a romance writer's help, he turned those tales into a first-person narrative. This would explain the I saw and I heard confusion. He genuinely believed some of the stories. He had heard them so many times, from so many reliable sources, that they became his memories. This is not lying. This is a kind of memory infection. It happens to journalists, to soldiers, to anyone who listens to trauma. The story becomes your own. But this theory has a fatal flaw. The catapult engineers of 1281. How did a man sitting in Tabriz know the name and nationality and year of 2 obscure Arab engineers? That detail is not in any known Persian guidebook. It is in the Yuan Shi, the Chinese dynastic history, which was compiled after Polo's death. The only way he could have known it is if he was in China, or if he spoke to someone who had direct access to Chinese court records. And the only people with that access were high-ranking foreigners in Kublai Khan's administration. The skeptics have a counter. Polo could have met a Mongol diplomat in Tabriz who had served in the Khan's court. But that diplomat would have to have a freakishly precise memory for dates and names. And Polo would have to have the luck to meet him, the wit to question him, and the memory to retain the detail for decades. It is possible. But it is a series of improbabilities stacked on top of each other. Occam's razor points a different way. He was there. He saw the preparations for the invasion. He heard the names of the engineers because it was court gossip. He remembered because it was terrifying. The smell of the bazaar, what Polo got right that no guidebook could. Let us move beyond the binary of went or didn't go. Let us ask a more fruitful question. What does it feel like to read the book as a historical source, rather than a legal deposition? When you read Polo with a nose for the lived, the messy, the unromantic, you find passages that no Persian geographer would ever write. Here are 3. The stink of Hangzhou. He describes the city of Kinsei Hangzhou as the greatest city in the world. 12,000 stone bridges, 10 great market squares, a lake with marble palaces. Then he adds, in a flat, almost disgusted tone, the people eat every kind of flesh, including dogs and other unclean beasts. He notes that the city produces so much filth that the Khan had to build a massive sewer system. A Persian guidebook would praise the gardens. Polo praises the sewers. That is the eye of a man who walked those streets and wrinkled his nose. The women of the lake. He describes the pleasure boats on West Lake, where courtesans would sing and play instruments. He notes, with a businessman's detachment, that the men of the city would take these women home and treat them with great honor. Then he adds the strangest detail. The women were so skilled in caresses and flattery that a stranger who visited them would feel as if he had known them his whole life. This is not a geographical fact. It is a psychological observation. It is the memory of a lonely traveler who, one night on a silk-cushioned boat, was made to feel less foreign. You cannot steal that from a book. The salt of the Gobi. He describes crossing the desert. He says that at night, travelers hear the sound of drums and voices. It is the spirits of the desert calling your name. If you answer, you are lost. If you ignore it, you survive. This is the one moment where he allows himself to be truly medieval. And yet, modern geologists tell us that the Gobi Desert has singing sands, dunes that vibrate in the wind to produce low-frequency hums that can sound like drums. He didn't know that. He thought it was spirits. But he heard something. And he reported it. The prison of the book Why We Can't Trust Any Copy. We have one final piece of evidence to consider, and it is the most frustrating of all. We do not have Marco Polo's book. We have copies of copies of copies. The original manuscript, written in Old French or possibly Venetian Italian or Latin, we don't know, is lost. The earliest surviving manuscript is from about 1350, 50 years after Polo's death. There are over 150 different versions, in different languages, with different chapter orders, different spellings, different facts. One version says the Khan had 10,000 white horses. Another says 12,000. One version says the island of Madagascar is 2,000 miles from the mainland. Another says 1,000. Scribes changed things. They corrected what they thought were errors. They added marvels from Mandeville. They subtracted boring passages about salt and coal. The version we read in modern English is a reconstruction. Scholars compare manuscripts and choose what they think is original. It is an act of faith. So when someone says, Marco Polo never mentioned the Great Wall, the honest answer is, we don't know what he mentioned. Maybe his original manuscript had a paragraph about a ruined earthen rampart that some scribe in 1370 thought was irrelevant and cut. Maybe it had a description of tea that a copyist who had never heard of tea changed to a hot water soup. The text is a sieve. We are trying to catch water with a sieve. The verdict of history, a useful liar. Let us return to the prison cell in Genoa. Rustic Hello is scribbling. Marco is talking. They are two men, one with a sword of ink, one with a shield of memory. They are not writing history. They are writing a description of the world. The title is important. It is not my true adventures. It is the description of the world. It is an attempt to hold the entire known and unknown earth in a single book, like a mosaic. Some tiles are bright and real. Some are dim and borrowed. But the mosaic, as a whole, is a work of art. Did Marco Polo lie? He lied the way a painter lies when he moves a mountain a few miles to the left for a better composition. He lied the way a father lies when he tells his son he once wrestled a wolf. He lied because the truth, the raw, unprocessed truth of 24 years of walking, sweating, starving, trading, bowing to a Mongol emperor, sleeping on yak skins, eating fermented mare's milk, watching a civilization that made Venice look like a mud puddle, was unspeakable. The truth cannot be spoken. It can only be pointed at, approximated, and then lost in translation. Marco Polo pointed. He pointed farther and more accurately than anyone before him. If that makes him a liar, then let us build a statue to all liars who show us a world beyond our doorstep. I close this second part with an image. It is not from any manuscript. It is a fantasy. But it is a fantasy that feels truer than the facts. Imagine an old man, Marco Polo, walking the stone streets of Venice in the year 1323. He is in his late 70s. He wears a simple wool cloak. He walks with a cane. He passes the Rialto Bridge, where merchants shout prices for pepper and silk. He smells the salt and the sewage and the frying fish. A young trader stops him. Messer Polo, he says, is it true that in Cathay, the roofs are made of gold? Marco stops. He looks at the young man. He looks at the bridge, the canal, the gulls. He smiles a small, tired smile. No, he says. The roofs are made of yellow glazed tile. They shine in the sun like gold from a distance. But when you get close, you see they are only clay. The young man looks disappointed. Then why go so far for clay? Marco Polo laughs. It is a dry, dusty laugh, like wind over the Gobi. He taps his cane on the stone. Because, he says, no one in Venice believed that clay could shine like gold. I had to see it for myself. And now, young man, you don't have to. He walks on. The young man watches him go. And he wonders if the old man told him the truth, or just a better kind of lie. The silk that wasn't silk, the throne that wasn't gold, and the deathbed confession that wasn't a confession. By the same unquiet historian. We have followed Marco Polo from the prison cell to the palace, from the silences of the Great Wall to the whispers of the Persian bazaars. We have weighed the catapult engineers against the missing teacups. We have seen the prosecution stumble over coal and the defense falter over foot binding. And still the question hangs in the air like the dust of the Gobi. Did he lie? But perhaps we have been asking the wrong question all along. Perhaps the question is not whether Marco Polo told falsehoods, but what kind of truth his book contains. A merchant's truth is different from a monk's truth. A traveler's truth is different from a cartographer's truth. And a truth told in a Genoese prison, to a romance writer, in a language neither man spoke as his mother tongue, is different from any truth we might recognize. Let us now abandon the courtroom. Let us become archaeologists of the imagination. Let us dig into the specific, strangest, most contested passages of Polo's book, the ones that have made scholars tear out their hair for 7 centuries, and ask not did this happen, but why would he say this if it didn't? The black stones of Cathay, a miracle rejected. We have already mentioned coal. But let us sit with it for a moment. In Book 2, Chapter 30 of most manuscript versions, Polo writes, throughout this province of Cathay there are black stones, dug from the mountains, which burn like logs. They keep the fire better than wood. If you put them on the fire in the evening, they will still be burning in the morning. They are so plentiful that the whole province heats its baths with them. In 1300, this was nonsense. Europe knew of no such stone. Wood was wood. Charcoal was charcoal. A stone that burned was a stone that was magic, and magic was either a miracle from God or a trick of the devil. Polo was neither a theologian nor a demonologist. He was a man describing what he had seen. And what he had seen was the single most common fuel of northern China, coal. But here is the detail that matters. Polo does not simply say they burn. He describes the duration, all night. He describes the use, baths. He describes the abundance, plentiful. This is not a man repeating a Persian encyclopedia. Persian encyclopedias of the time did not mention coal as a domestic fuel because the Persians used charcoal and animal dung. Coal was a curiosity to them. To Polo, it was a daily fact of life. He mentions it the way you might mention that the sky is blue. And then he moves on. The lie, if there is one, is not in the coal. The lie is in the tone. He makes it sound normal. He makes it sound like something any traveler would notice. But no European traveler had noticed it before. Not because they hadn't seen it, but because they hadn't believed it. Coal was so far outside their mental map that they looked at it and saw black rocks. Polo looked at it and saw a commodity. That is the difference between a merchant and a monk. The paper money mirage, a fantasy that wasn't. The paper money is even more extraordinary. Polo describes it with the precision of a counterfeiter studying his craft. The Khan has the bark of the mulberry tree stripped, and the thin inner rind made into sheets like paper. These sheets are black. On each sheet, he has his seal impressed. And all his subjects, under pain of death, must accept this paper as payment for any goods whatsoever. Europe in 1300 had no paper money. It barely had paper. The idea that a ruler could decree that a piece of mulberry bark was worth a gold bezant was absurd. It violated the natural law of value. Gold is gold. Bark is bark. And yet, Kublai Khan did exactly this. The Yuan dynasty's paper currency, the Chow, was one of the great monetary experiments in history. It worked because the Khan had the military power to enforce it. Polo understood this. He describes the enforcement mechanism. If any man refuses to accept it, he is put to death. He does not moralize. He does not say it is good or bad. He simply reports. A liar inventing a fantasy would have described a city where gold grew on trees. Polo described a fiscal policy. And he got it exactly right. But here is the twist that the skeptics love. Polo describes the paper as black. The actual yuan paper money was grayish-white, printed with black ink. Some manuscripts correct this to black ink. But the earliest manuscripts say black sheets. Is this an error? A memory failure? Or a scribe's mistake? The defense says, he saw the black ink on the paper, and in his memory, the paper became black. This is how human memory works. It compresses, shifts, and recolors. It is not a lie. It is a flaw. The prosecution says, he never saw it. He heard about it from someone who heard about it. The black sheets are a corruption of a Persian description of black-lettered paper. Who is right? We cannot know. But we can notice a pattern. When Polo is describing things he could have heard about secondhand, the rock, the unicorn, his descriptions are vague and borrowed. When he is describing things that have a bureaucratic, practical, commercial texture, coal, paper money, the postal system, his descriptions are vivid and specific. That pattern suggests a man who saw the practical marvels and borrowed the fantastic ones. The Palace of the Khan, a gold rush in words. Let us now walk into the single most famous passage in the book, the description of Kublai Khan's palace at Khanbaliq, modern Beijing. Polo writes, the palace is built of marble and other fine stones. The halls are gilded and painted with figures of dragons and beasts. The roof is of red, green, azure, and yellow, so bright that it shines like crystal. The great Khan's own chamber is entirely covered in gold, with gold dragons twisting around the pillars. For centuries, this was dismissed as Orientalist fantasy. No such palace existed. Marco Polo was lying to impress his readers. Then archaeologists began excavating the site of the Yuan dynasty's capital, Dadu, beneath modern Beijing. They found the foundations of a vast marble palace. They found remnants of glazed roof tiles in red, green, azure, and yellow. They found traces of gold leaf on wooden pillars. They found dragon motifs everywhere. Polo was not lying. He was understating. The palace was even larger than he described. But he had no language to convey it. He said gilded. It was more than gilded. He said shines like crystal. He meant the glaze was so bright it hurt the eyes. The lesson is painful. Polo's failure is not a failure of honesty. It is a failure of language. He had no words for the scale, the color, the sheer otherness of the Mongol court. So he used the words he had: gold, marble, dragons. And because those words were already used by European poets to describe imaginary palaces, his readers assumed he was lying. He was telling the truth. But the truth was unbelievable. And that, in the end, is the same as a lie. The women of the tower, a test case in credibility. Let us examine one passage that almost no one believes, and see if we can find a kernel of truth in it. In Book 1, while describing the province of Kerman in Persia, Polo writes about a custom. When a man has a daughter, he takes her to a great tower where the old women of the city live. And he leaves her there until she is of marriageable age. And no man may enter the tower except the fathers. This is absurd. No such custom existed in medieval Persia. It sounds like a confused memory of a Zoroastrian fire temple, or a Christian convent, or a brothel. The skeptics point to this as proof that Polo was a gullible collector of tall tales. But let us look closer. The passage appears only in some manuscripts. Others omit it. Others change it to "the women are kept in seclusion." It may be a scribal interpolation from a different source. Or it may be Polo misremembering a story he heard about the harem of a local lord. Or it may be a complete invention by rustic Hello, who loved stories of imprisoned maidens. This is the problem with using single passages as evidence. The text is not stable. The passage about the tower is not in the earliest Latin manuscript. It appears in later French copies. We cannot be sure Polo ever said it. The honest historian must admit, some of the book is probably not Polo. Some of it is Rusticello's embroidery. Some of it is scribes adding good stories from other books. Some of it is outright error. But that does not mean the core is false. It means the transmission is corrupt. A story within a story. Now we come to the most famous story about Marco Polo, which is also the story we cannot verify at all. It is the story of his deathbed. According to a later chronicle by Jacopo d'Acqui, written about 50 years after Polo's death, the old merchant lay dying in his Venetian home. His family, his priest, and his friends gathered around. They begged him to renounce the falsehoods in his book, to save his soul from the fires of hell. And Marco Polo, with his last breath, replied, "I have not told half of what I saw." This is a perfect story. It is too perfect. It has the shape of a hagiographic legend, the saint who insists he has understated his miracles. It is almost certainly invented by someone who wanted to defend Polo against the accusations of lying that were already circulating in the 14th century. But even if the story is invented, it points to a truth. The real Marco Polo, the man of flesh and bone, never recanted. He never said, "I made it up." He went to his grave insisting that his book was true, and that the truth was even stranger. Why would a man lie on his deathbed? What possible motive could he have? He was not going to be punished by the state. The church had not condemned his book. He was a wealthy, respected citizen. He had nothing to gain by maintaining a lie. Everything to gain by confessing, if only to silence the whispers and die in peace. He did not confess. He doubled down. That is not the behavior of a conscious liar. It is the behavior of a man who believed his own story. What Polo saw that we cannot see. Let us try, for a moment, to imagine what Marco Polo actually saw. Not the filtered, scribe-corrupted, Rusticello-embellished text. The raw sensory experience. He saw a city Hangzhou with 12,000 bridges, where a single market sold more pepper in a day than all of Europe in a year. He saw a postal system that moved messages faster than any Roman road. He saw a navy of 6,000 ships, each larger than any vessel in the Mediterranean. He saw an emperor who could summon 1,000,000 horsemen, who lived in a palace of marble and gold, who held court in a tent the size of a cathedral. He saw these things, and he had no words. The word million did not mean a precise number, it meant uncountably many. He used it over and over. Everything was 1,000,000. 1,000,000 bridges. 1,000,000 soldiers. 1,000,000 ships. He was not exaggerating. He was giving up on precision. He was saying, you cannot count this. You cannot imagine this. Take my word or leave it. We, reading 700 years later, know that he was telling the truth. Hangzhou was the largest city in the world. The Yuan Navy did have thousands of ships. The Khan's postal system was the fastest in pre-modern history. We know this because we have archaeology, Chinese records, Persian chronicles. Marco Polo had none of these. He had only his eyes and his memory. And yet we doubt him. We doubt him because he saw too much. Because his truth exceeds our expectation of what a medieval merchant could know. We want him to be either a perfect witness or a complete liar. He is neither. He is a man who saw a world so vast that the only honest response was to sound dishonest. Comparing Polo to Ibn Battuta. To judge Polo fairly, we must compare him to the only other pre-modern traveler who attempted a similar journey. Ibn Battuta, the Moroccan scholar who traveled through the Islamic world, India, and China in the 14th century, about 50 years after Polo. Ibn Battuta is almost universally accepted as authentic. He describes Chinese junks, Chinese food, Chinese customs. He mentions the Great Wall. He calls it the Wall of Yajuj and Majuj. He mentions tea. He mentions foot binding. By the standards of the Polo prosecution, Ibn Battuta is the real deal. And yet, Ibn Battuta also describes impossible marvels. He claims to have met a man who lived for 350 years. He claims to have seen a mountain of salt. He claims to have traveled from Delhi to China in a single leap of imagination. Scholars now believe that Ibn Battuta may never have reached China at all, that his China section is a patchwork of stories he heard in India. The same doubts that surround Polo surround Battuta. But we treat Battuta more kindly because he was a scholar, not a merchant. This is prejudice. We want our truth-tellers to be monks or lawyers. We distrust merchants. But merchants have a different kind of honesty, the honesty of the invoice. Polo's book reads like an invoice for the world. It is dry, repetitive, and obsessed with prices and measures. That is not the voice of a liar. That is the voice of a man who spent his life adding columns of numbers. What Polo owes us. Let us end this third part with an accounting. Not of lies and truths, but of debts. What does the modern world owe to Marco Polo? We owe him the first accurate description of paper money, which would not appear in Europe for another 200 years. We owe him the first European description of coal, which would fuel the Industrial Revolution. We owe him the first detailed account of the Mongol Empire, which reshaped the geopolitics of Asia. We owe him the name of Japan Cipangu, which sent Columbus sailing west. We owe him the image of a world larger, richer, stranger, and more civilized than any European had dreamed. If he lied about some things, the rock, the unicorn, the Tower of Maidens, he lied in the service of a larger truth. He told Europe, "You are not the center of the world. There is an empire in the east that makes Rome look like a village. You should be afraid, or curious, or both." Europe did not listen. Not for 200 years. And then, when it finally listened, it sent Columbus and Da Gama and Magellan to find the world that Polo had described. They found it. And they found it because Polo had pointed the way. A liar does not point the way. A liar sends you into a ditch. Marco Polo sent Columbus across an ocean. That is not the legacy of a fraud. That is the legacy of a prophet. The Book of Doubt, the silence of the Khan, and the truth that lives in the telling. By the same unquiet historian. We have traveled far. From a Genos prison to the marble palaces of Kanbalik. From the black stones of Cathay to the paper money that was worth more than gold. From the deathbed that was not a confession to the silence of the Great Wall. We have weighed the evidence, examined the witnesses, and found ourselves no closer to a simple verdict. Because there is no simple verdict. There is only the book, and the man, and the long shadow they cast across 7 centuries. Let us now do something that historians rarely permit themselves. Let us admit that the question, "Did Marco Polo lie about everything?" is not a historical question. It is a philosophical question. It is a question about the nature of truth, the limits of language, and the human hunger for certainty in a world that offers only stories. We will not render a verdict. We will do something more honest. We will walk through the 7 doors of doubt, open each one, and see what lies on the other side. And when we have walked through all 7, we will find ourselves not in a courtroom, but in a library of 1,000,000 books, all of them true, all of them false, all of them human. The silence of the Khan. Let us begin with the most haunting absence in the entire Polo corpus. Not the Great Wall. Not tea. Not foot binding. Something deeper. Kublai Khan died in 1294. Marco Polo claims to have been his close confidant, his trusted emissary, his friend. And yet, in all the Chinese, Mongol, and Persian records of Kublai Khan's court, there is not a single mention of Marco Polo. Not one. No name. No title. No gift recorded. No mission noted. This is the prosecution's nuclear weapon. The Yuan dynasty kept meticulous records. They recorded the names of Persian astronomers, Tibetan lamas, Nestorian priests, Yuga scribes. They recorded the arrival of a certain Baluo family from the west, but that was a different family, a Christian Turkic clan, not the Polos of Venice. There is no Marco in any Chinese document. The defense scrambles. The records were destroyed. The Mongols didn't care about Venetian merchants. Marco's name was Mongolized beyond recognition. But these are excuses, not evidence. The silence of the archive is loud. It says, "You were not important enough to write down." And yet, the absence of a name is not the absence of a person. Millions of people lived in Kublai Khan's empire whose names never entered a chronicle. Merchants came and went. The bureaucrats of the Yuan court did not record the name of every foreign trader who sold pepper in Kanbalik. Polo claims to have been a special envoy, but even special envoys are forgotten if they did not leave a monument or a scandal. The silence of the Khan proves nothing. But it proves something. It proves that Marco Polo was not the figure he claimed to be. He was not a governor. He was not the Khan's right hand. He was, at best, a trusted minor official, perhaps a simu-ren, a colored-eye person, the Mongol term for foreign administrators from the West. And the Yuan bureaucracy did not bother to record the names of simu-ren unless they were extraordinary. This is not a lie. It is an exaggeration. He inflated his importance. It is the sin of every memoirist. But it is a sin that casts doubt on everything else. If he lied about his status, what else did he lie about? The map that wasn't there. Let us consider a different kind of silence. Marco Polo brought back no map. He drew no chart. He described distances in days of travel, not in degrees of longitude. He gave no coordinates. He did not correct the ancient Ptolemaic maps that showed the Indian Ocean as a lake. For a man who claimed to have traveled across the entire width of Asia, his cartographic ignorance is staggering. He had no idea where he was. He could not tell you the latitude of Kanbalik. He could not tell you the shape of the coast of China. He thought Japan was 1,000 miles from where it actually lies. The prosecution says, this proves he never went. A real traveler would have paid attention. He would have drawn maps. He would have corrected errors. The defense says, you misunderstand medieval travel. Merchants did not draw maps. Maps were for kings and scholars. Merchants followed routes, memorized landmarks, counted days. Polo was not a cartographer. He was a mule driver with a good memory. This is true. But it is also a dodge. Ibn Battuta, a scholar, brought back no map either. Medieval travel was not about geometry. It was about narrative. Polo's book is a map made of words. It says, go east for 40 days, then north for 20, then ask for the city with the red roofs. That is how merchants navigated. Not with charts, but with stories. Still, the absence of a map nags. If Polo had truly spent 24 years in the East, he would have known that the world was round. He would have known that the Indian Ocean was open to the south. He would have known that Africa was not a wall at the edge of the world. He knew none of these things. His geography was medieval, not modern. That does not make him a liar. It makes him a man of his time. The Doge's interrogation. Imagine, for a moment, that you are the Doge of Venice in 1295. A merchant named Marco Polo returns after 24 years. He claims to have served the greatest emperor in the world. You are skeptical. You ask him questions. You ask, what did you eat at the Khan's table? He says, mare's milk, fermented. Roasted mutton. Rice cooked in broth. You ask, what language did you speak with him? He says, Persian. The Khan spoke Persian through an interpreter. I learned Mongolian later, but poorly. You ask, what did the Khan look like? He says, short. Stocky. A long beard. Eyes that looked through you. These answers are plausible. They are not heroic. They are the answers of a man who was there but was never close. Then you ask the question that no one asked, but that everyone should have asked. Show me your paisa. Show me the Khan's seal. And Marco Polo says, I returned it. As was required. The Khan does not give his golden tablets as souvenirs. Then bring me a letter from the Khan. A trade agreement. Anything. The Khan does not write letters to Venetian merchants. He writes letters to kings. I am not a king. This is the moment when the Doge would have decided, this man is either a liar or a fool. A real envoy would have brought proof. A real merchant would have brought contracts. But Marco Polo brought neither. He brought only his memory. And memory, as we know, is not evidence. Memory is a story we tell ourselves until we believe it. The rustic hello problem. We have mentioned rustic hello of Pisa, the romance writer who shared Polo's prison cell and co-authored the book. But we have not fully faced the implications. Rustic Hello was not a journalist. He was not a transcriber. He was a ghostwriter with his own agenda. He had written a popular Arthurian romance before he met Polo. He knew what sold. He knew that readers wanted knights, dragons, and damsels in distress. He knew that they did not want shipping manifests and tax rates. How much of Polo's book is Polo, and how much is Rustic Hello? We cannot know. But we can guess. The early chapters, describing the Middle East and Persia, are dry and geographical. They read like a merchant's notebook. The later chapters, describing China and the Khan's court, are more vivid and more structured. They read like a romance writer polishing raw material. The famous opening, "You emperors, kings, dukes, marquises, counts, knights, and all you who desire to know the diverse races of men," is pure rustic hello. It is the voice of a courtly entertainer, not a Venetian bean counter. Marco Polo may have never said those words. He may have simply sat in his cell, talking, while rustic hello transformed his rambling monologue into a book that would sell. If this is true, then the lies in the book are not Polo's lies. They are Rusticello's embellishments. The rock. The unicorn. The Tower of Maidens. These are the fingerprints of a romance writer who could not resist a good story. Polo may have said, "I heard about a giant bird," and Rusticello wrote, "A bird so large it can lift an elephant." Polo may have said, "There are wild oxen with a single horn," and Rusticello wrote, "The unicorn, which is a fierce beast." The book is a collaboration. And in any collaboration, the truth is the first casualty. The curious case of the missing return journey. Let us look at the structure of Polo's narrative. He describes his journey east, Venice to Acre to Hormuz to the Pamirs to the Gobi to Kanbalik. A detailed, plausible route, though full of errors. Then he describes 24 years in China. Then he describes his return journey. He escorts a Mongol princess by sea to Persia, then travels overland to Venice. The return journey is rushed. It is vague. It contains almost none of the vivid detail of the outward journey. Why? The prosecution says, because he never made the return journey. He never left Persia. The sea voyage is a fiction. The defense says, because he was tired. Because he was old. Because he had already described the Silk Road once, and he did not want to repeat himself. But there is a third possibility. The return journey by sea from China to Persia was the most dangerous part of his travels. He may have been seasick. He may have been terrified. He may have spent the voyage huddled below deck, seeing nothing, and therefore had nothing to report. His silence is not a lie. It is a trauma. We know from other sources that a Mongol princess was sent by sea to Persia in 1291. We know she arrived safely. We know her name, Kokachin. Marco Polo claims he was one of her escorts. There is no independent confirmation. But there is also no contradiction. The story is plausible. It is also convenient. It explains why he left China, not by choice, but by duty. The sea voyage is the weakest part of the book. It is also the most defensible. A man who traveled by sea in the 13th century saw nothing but water and sky for months. There is nothing to describe. The silence is not a lie. It is the ocean. The psychology of the long con. Let us now ask the most uncomfortable question. What kind of man would invent a 24-year journey? If Marco Polo lied, he was not a simple con man. Con men run short cons. They take the money and disappear. Polo returned to Venice and lived there for 30 years. He raised a family. He paid taxes. He went to church. He was a respected, if eccentric, member of the community. He did not sell his story for a fortune. He did not seek a royal pension. He did not even publish his book himself. Rustic Hello published it, and Polo seems to have had little control over its circulation. This is not the behavior of a liar. Liars are restless. They fear exposure. They move on. Polo stayed. He faced the whispers, the nickname Illinois Million, the quiet doubts of his fellow merchants. He never defended himself publicly. He never wrote a second book. He never sued for slander. He simply lived his life, a wealthy old man with a strange story. Why would a liar do that? Why would a liar not recant on his deathbed, when recantation cost nothing and might buy him peace? The only answer that makes psychological sense is that he believed his own story. He may have exaggerated. He may have borrowed. He may have misremembered. But he did not invent. The story was too big, too tangled, too boring in its details to be a conscious fabrication. No one invents the yield of the Hangzhou pepper market. No one invents the number of white horses in the Khan's herd. Those details are the residue of a real memory, worn smooth by time. The book as a living thing. We come at last to the seventh door. Behind it is not an answer. Behind it is a realization. Marco Polo's book is not a document. It is a living thing. For 700 years, it has been read, copied, translated, doubted, defended, celebrated, and dismissed. It has changed shape with every manuscript. It has grown new marvels and lost old facts. It has been used to justify colonialism, to inspire exploration, to teach geography, and to entertain children. It has been a weapon, a shield, a mirror, and a dream. The book that we hold in our hands is not Marco Polo's book. It is our book. We have made it what it is. We have chosen to believe some parts and reject others. We have decided that coal and paper money are real, while the rock and the unicorn are fantasy. But those decisions are ours, not his. He simply told a story. We are the ones who sort it into truth and lies. Perhaps that is the deepest truth of all. Marco Polo did not lie about everything. But he did not tell the truth about everything either. He told a story. And a story, unlike a lie, is not a falsehood. It is a different kind of truth. It is a truth that lives in the telling, not in the verification. It is a truth that changes with each telling, but remains true in its essence. The essence of Marco Polo's story is this: the world is larger, stranger, and more wonderful than you know. Go see it for yourself. That is not a lie. That is an invitation. And 700 years later, we are still accepting it. The man who stayed. Let me leave you with an image. It is not from any book. It is from the imagination, but it is true in the way that only imagination can be. It is a winter evening in Venice, 1324. Marco Polo is dying. His daughters are at his bedside. His wife, Donata, holds his hand. A priest reads the last rites. The old man's eyes are closed. His breath is shallow. He is not thinking about China. He is not thinking about Kublai Khan or the paper money or the black stones. He is thinking about the canals of Venice, the smell of the sea, the sound of the gulls. He is thinking about his father, Niccolo, who took him away when he was 17. He is thinking about his mother, who died while he was gone. He is thinking about all the years he missed, all the births and deaths, all the ordinary life that happened without him. He opens his eyes. He looks at his daughters. He tries to speak. The priest leans close. I saw it, he whispers. I saw all of it. His daughters weep. The priest crosses himself. Marco Polo closes his eyes for the last time. Outside, the snow is falling on the canals. The merchants are shouting at the Rialto. The gulls are crying. The world is turning, vast and indifferent, full of wonders that no one will ever believe. And somewhere, in a library, in a castle, in a monastery, a scribe is copying a book. A book about a man who went to the edge of the world and came back to tell the tale. The scribe does not know if the tale is true. He does not care. He is copying it because it is beautiful, because it is strange, because it makes the world larger than it was before he read it. That is the legacy of Marco Polo. Not truth. Not lies. Wonder. And wonder, in the end, is the only thing that matters. Authors note unspoken, unwritten, but here all the same. This is not a history. It is a meditation. If you want a definitive answer to the question, did Marco Polo lie about everything, you will not find it here. You will not find it anywhere. The archives are silent. The manuscripts are corrupt. The man himself is dust. But if you want to understand why the question matters, why it has haunted us for 700 years, why we cannot stop asking it, then you have found what you came for. The question is not about Marco Polo. It is about us. It is about our hunger for certainty in a world that offers only stories. It is about our fear of being fooled, and our deeper fear that the truth might be too small to hold what we have seen. Marco Polo saw something. We do not know what. But we know that it changed him. And it changed the world. That is enough. That has always been enough. Now close the book. Go outside. Look at the sky. Imagine that somewhere beyond it, there is a city with 12,000 bridges, where the roofs shine like gold and the women sing on the lake. You will never see it. But you can believe it. And in that belief, you will travel farther than any merchant ever did. That is the gift. That is the lie. That is the truth.